it's really my great pleasure to. Oops. Yes. All right. This is our slide. So our other keynote speaker is Veronica Eady. She is the Senior Deputy Executive Officer of Policy and Equity. Why don't you come up? You can sit here, and I'll give you the podium in a minute. It's really a great pleasure because she is really a great friend of mine for quite a long time. And to embarrass her a little bit, today is her birthday. So happy birthday, Veronica. She's been in her current position for a couple of years now, and previously served as the Assistant Executive Officer for Environmental Justice in the California Air Resources Board. So now at the Bay Area Environmental Air Quality Management District. But I think what gives her presentation here, her talk in just a moment, so much salience to what we do is not only a current work, although I'm really interested to hear what she's going to say about her experience in government now, but a long-standing and really decades-long work in environmental justice and many leadership roles. She served previously as the Vice President and Director of Conservation at the Conservation Law Foundation in Massachusetts. She was the Associate General Counsel and Director of Environmental Justice at the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, a nonprofit civil rights law firm in New York City. She was the prior government position, Director of Environmental Justice and Brownfields Program for the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, where she also published a book on Massachusetts environmental justice policy. She was the Executive Director of Alternatives for Community and Environment, which is an environmental justice advocacy organization in Boston, one of the leading ones in the country. And also, and this is especially how I know her, the former chair of the EPA's, US EPA's Federal Advisory Committee on Environmental Justice, that is the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And so, as you can tell, she just has a wealth of experience to share and knowledge. Apart from her government service and service with NGOs, she's also done quite a bit of teaching in various universities, including here at Stanford, up the road at Stanford Law School, and I think also at Berkeley, right, over the last couple of years. Now, she has a BA from University of Southern California and a JD from Hastings College of Law. And so I'm really interested to see what it is, but thank you so much for joining us, Veronica. Please welcome Veronica Eady.
Thank you, Professor Yang. And I do want to say that it's wonderful to come after Reverend Garanzini. Your talk was really inspiring. And of the many places where I've been affiliated, I did teach for some time on the adjunct faculty at Fordham. Jesuit schools play a really important role, and so it was really great to hear that vision. So I thought that I would, I was sort of inspired today to talk about how the environmental justice movement has changed. And as I was thinking about that, I thought a really good lens is just the span of my career. And I really wanted to talk a little bit about working in government and how you advance environmental justice from inside government. And that has evolved and changed a lot over the years. And I think my legal career speaks out a little bit. I started out my career in 1989 at US EPA Region 9 in San Francisco. It was days, literally, after the Loma Prieta earthquake. In fact, I was offered a job there the day before the earthquake. I had no other job offers, but I thought I was supposed to wait and make them think I had other job offers I was considering. And unfortunately, the earthquake came the next day, and then I couldn't reach anybody because their office was condemned. And it was weeks, I think, before I was actually able to accept the offer that they made. And actually, the Loma Prieta earthquake and the aftermath of it, the debris, the freeways that were had to be demolished and removed shaped a lot of the environmental justice movement in California. So maybe that is a good way to start. But I started my career at EPA before the government really had any tools for us in terms of environmental justice. So back in 1989, late 89, 1990, I knew that I wanted to work in the environmental justice movement, and there had been years of progress made by, community groups, religious leaders who, during the 80s and before, built the environmental justice movement. But for me, as a young lawyer, I realized that my best plan of action was to stay at the EPA and learn what I could about environmental law. And learn how government functions so that I could deploy that in environmental justice organizations. And so when I left EPA, I did go into public interest work. In fact, worked at Earth Justice briefly. Professor Yang mentioned that I was at Stanford, and at that time there was well, maybe there's an environmental justice clinic there now, I don't know. But at the time, I was working in an environmental justice clinic and went on, as you heard, to work at Alternatives for Community Environment. But in the early 2000s, my plan changed. Gina McCarthy, who was one of the EPA administrators under President Obama, hired me to work in the state of Massachusetts and to write an environmental justice policy. And so I started out working for her in Massachusetts, where she was an undersecretary at the time. I put together a state advisory group on environmental justice. We traveled around the state, meeting with communities, learning about how the government was serving them, the environmental agencies, learning about how the environmental agencies weren't serving them at all, and trying to understand the history, the history behind how we got to where we are with overburdened communities and contaminated communities. Some of that was redlining. Every part of the country, I think, has a different story. In Massachusetts, some of it was the story of immigration of Europeans like Irish and Italian and Portuguese. And so learning about how those populations, which when they arrived here were really outcast populations, formed the need for environmental justice in Massachusetts. And that went on from the Portuguese to the Cape Verdean and Brazilians and others who speak Portuguese languages and come from the global South. Understanding that was really important. The other piece that was important was tribes. Learning about how the state of Massachusetts was relating to tribes. What was their relationship, especially with the environmental agencies? And much to my surprise, there was no relationship. When I went to the tribes in Massachusetts, and at that time there was only one federally recognized tribe, there might be 2 or 3 now, they didn't know anybody in any of the state environmental agencies. And so there was this time of building relationships and building trust and learning how we could work together towards environmental justice. And that really is reflective in many ways of where we are right now, which I'll come to in a minute. But one of the most important things that I learned from Gina McCarthy was I, used my advisory committee. We came up with an environmental justice policy, and we came up with something that I thought we could sell to our Republican governor and sell to industry. And during the course of my tenure at the state of Massachusetts, Gina and others who were my bosses were hauled constantly into the governor's office to get yelled at about, what are you doing? What environmental justice? What is this? What are you doing? And so I thought that I was supposed to write something that the governor would think, okay, this is great. Yeah, we'll sign this. I gave Gina that first draft and she said, and I was very proud of it. And she said, gave it back to me and said, I want you to go back to your desk and I want you to write something that you think I am absolutely going to hate and that the governor is absolutely going to hate. So go back and do that, because if you don't have to do that, you're going to bargain away everything. You need to have something that you can give up. So don't give me something I can sell. Give me something that I'm going to hate. I have taken that lesson with me, and I have to say, not everybody is a believer in Gina's approach. So it has gotten me into trouble over the course of my career, but it is really how I function. And it's been really amazing at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, working in a region that is so diverse in terms of communities, in terms of what overburdened communities are facing, and in terms of what people want and need. Right now, and Violet Santa's here, and I work closely with her on our Community Advisory Council. So now, Violet, you have heard, give me something we're going to hate. It might get me in trouble, but that's where I'm working from. So I'm going to skip up to my years at the California Air Resources Board. So I had kind of jumped around. I was, as you heard, on the East Coast in New York and Boston. And in 2017, I was offered the opportunity to move back to California and work for the California Air Resources Board. They, at the time, did not have any environmental justice executives or equity work to speak of. And so it was my opportunity to come out and build a program from scratch, which is kind of my superpower that I developed during the course of my career. So I hadn't lived in California for a long time. And one of the things that I felt was important would be important in my work with CARB is to know what EJ groups out here cared about. And so it was important for me to know that walking into my interviews, so that I would talk about something that is not only relevant to environmental justice in California, but what environmental justice groups are fighting for. And I knew at the time, I wasn't so naive as to think that the cap and trade program under CARB's climate programs was something that I could change or defeat in any way, but I knew that it was something that communities cared about. And so I tried to dig into what it was about cap and trade that communities didn't like. Part of that is, these facilities remaining in their host communities that are overburdened. And part of that is the possibility of excess emissions of noxious things that might come out with greenhouse gases. So when I was offered the job, I thought, this is what I need to do. I need to address or work with communities to address the pollution that is coming out of cap and trade facilities in their communities. And within a few months of my being at CARB, there was a law passed called AB 617, Assembly Bill 617, that was supposed to be a companion bill to the cap and trade program that gave communities tools to work with to reduce emissions from those facilities in their communities, as well as other things, highways, trucking, truck routes, ports, farms where there's agricultural spraying. And I have to say that, and it was an imperative to air districts like the one I work for, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, to work with communities and support communities to develop plans to reduce these emissions. And I still work on that program to this day. I helped build the program at CARB, and now I help implement the program at the Bay Area Air District. Um, I have to say that the biggest challenge for my air district, and we think of ourselves as being really, we're the Bay Area, we're very progressive. But I think that every air district that's been involved in this program, as well as CARB, has been challenged by the need to share power with communities. So we went from a situation where in the 90s, President Clinton signed his executive order on environmental justice, and it talked about meaningful involvement of environmental justice communities in decision making, to 2017, where it didn't say that in the statute, but if you read AB 617, there's no way that you can implement this program without sharing power with communities. So in the beginning, we had some very tight deadlines, and for air districts, we thought, well, we have these tight deadlines and we have to produce these plans. What are we going to do? Well, we're just going to use basically the same recipe that we've been using for years, make it look something like a state implementation plan under the Clean Air Act, which is something that we are used to doing. We've been doing it for decades, and we'll get input from the community, and that will be fine. We were creating these community steering committees. We were imposing our rules on them. We weren't compensating people for their time. Well, we were in the Bay Area was, but other places, most other places in the state were not. So we were taking advantage of community knowledge and not compensating people for their time or for their use of their knowledge. There was no trust. Historically, there was no trust between the communities and the air district, and there was no trust in what we were doing because we were barreling through. In fact, the other day, well, there was one air district that actually expelled people off of the community steering committee because they were difficult or, weren't falling in line with what the air district wanted. And the other day, a couple of days ago, I was at a meeting of air districts to talk about this program. We were in LA, and there was somebody from an air district, and I ran into her in the airport and had, a meal with her. And she said, yeah, I remember in those early days, the people on our community steering committee wanted to have a meeting on their own that wasn't a meeting organized by the air district. And we told them they couldn't do it because it wasn't an official meeting. It wasn't sanctioned. And she, these years later has realized that that was wrong and that wasn't partnership, and that the air districts don't have to arrange these meetings. We don't have to sanction these meetings. We might support them. We might support them with funding and a place to meet, but it's not about us running a process. It's about us partnering with community groups and partnering with residents in a process that either they design and we support, or that is co-designed. Recently, and I'm gonna finish up shortly, I was on an email thread about a press release that we were sending out. And the press release originally said something about us participating as equal partners with communities to, solve problems in overburdened communities and reduce the burden. And one of my colleagues was very uncomfortable with the language, participate as equal partners. And she didn't have any history in environmental justice. She's an administrator. And she said, I think somebody had said something about meaningful involvement. And she said, I think, yes, meaningful involvement. That's great. And I responded on the thread, that might sound good, but that's language from 1994 that EPA came up with in 1994. We're in 2023. And now we talk about partnership, we don't talk about meaningful involvement because people know that it could mean something, but it also couldn't. It could not mean something. And so as an internal person within an agency, I have had to have been somebody to bring my colleagues along and help them learn. And sometimes they're offended by it because, they've presumably spent, many of them, 30 years or more at these agencies as engineers, as scientists, as lawyers, and are very proud of their work, as well they should be. But it's difficult. And it's a process of evolution to get them to think about communities and for them to trust communities, setting aside having communities trust us. So where are we now and where are we going? Well, we're in a period of transparency, democracy, which we heard about earlier, and the question of where the money is going. There's a real need to partner in all of these areas. So sharing data, doing participatory research, which we heard about as one of the priorities for Jesuit schools like this one. I had somebody tell me the other day when I was in LA, she had, through the AB 617 program, been working on a community air monitoring plan with the communities that she's working with. And she said, and we went out and we monitored, and guess what? Exactly what the community said was true. It was validated by this monitoring. And so for her, it was also a lesson of, yeah, people know what they're talking about, and it's important to listen to them. And so for her, as for many of us, we need to go through that process to learn to trust the expertise, local expertise. So just to wrap up, we've had conversations and we're working on things like community engaged enforcement. What does that mean? Well, we're figuring out what that means and we're learning from community groups, but it does mean that our enforcement program should go beyond, when we're working with communities, going beyond getting that initial call that says, there's a flaring event going on, or there's an odor. Communities want to be engaged beyond that. This is where they live, and they want to be kept informed of what's going on. We had a community member ask us where our money is going, and we're trying to engage in things like participatory budgeting, where the community actually gets to decide how money is spent. But besides participatory budgeting, there's this whole question of where is the money going. And a group of my colleagues got together to try to follow the money. Where is the incentive money going? Is it being spent equitably? Are we reaching the communities that really need to be reached? Are we equitably spending among communities of color and low-income communities? We tried to follow the money and we couldn't. Some of the money we couldn't follow beyond, San Francisco City Hall or, Santa Clara County, because we don't collect that information. So for us, the journey is also learning, well, what happens after it goes to the VTA? Where does it go beyond that? And are we reaching equitably communities of color? So we're in this period of evolution. And I'll just wrap up by saying that from the inside out, or regarding the inside out, you probably know that last week, President Biden, a week ago, signed a new executive order on environmental justice, updating the one that President Clinton signed in February of 1994. The Biden administration has been played an important role in the environmental justice movement. It remains to be seen in terms of some of the policies including what's in that environmental justice policy of last week. But there's been a lot of money that has come from Washington and that will continue to come from Washington into communities, to community groups, sometimes to air districts like my own, but it only comes to us when we're partnering with communities. So we do have one Biden era grant, but it's actually our community partner, Communities for a Better Environment, in East Oakland, that is doing the work, and we're supporting them. So in 2023, we are at a point where we're getting new policies, we're getting a lot of money, and it's important for all of us to really make the most of it, because we don't know what comes next. But it has been an evolution, and I will say right now that the biggest lesson has been transparency, having trust and patience, and sharing power. And I don't think, regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of who's in the governor's office, we can't retreat from that. There's no going back. So I'll end there, and I think we have about 5 minutes if people have questions. 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? I'm looking back there. We're okay? 3 minutes. All right, 3 minutes. So we'll
3
take
minutes.
1 question.
Okay, you got it.
Anybody? All right. Oh, go ahead. I'll be fast, and you can keep your questions short, please, so that we can get into one another.
Hi, Veronica. Thank you. I feel like saying Professor Veronica. Thank you for your talk and sharing all of your expertise and knowledge from working with environmental justice. My name is Edith, and I'm here from UC Santa Cruz with Mazzy and Sara. We are collaborators with a collective of urban gardeners out in Watsonville and Pájaro, California. And I have a question around the topic of land access and land tenure for community partners. And the question here is, there are a lot of religious institutions that are landlords to spaces that community gardens rent out. In this case, in Watsonville, the community partner Tierras Mil Peras is being evicted by the Episcopal Church. And we're facing this issue of I think we're very aligned in we're learning. You mentioned in your journey, you learned about how do we do environmental justice? How do we write this into the law? And I think from my positionality as a PhD researcher, also a person who shares identities with the community that I self-identify as campesino, immigrant, I'm how do we, who do you go to talk about these questions around land access? Because it's creating land insecurity and food insecurity. Who do you go to when the landlord and the actor is a religious institution? Because what we are seeing here is that visions around how to interpret the law are quite different. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I welcome you to, if you have any sense of orienting us towards who do we, how do you deal with maybe this issue, which we don't know about? And then if folks are also interested in coming to talk to us to learn about what Tierras Mil Peras is experiencing out in Watsonville and Pájaro, just in Santa Cruz County, neighboring county, you're more than welcome to. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I will be really quick, and I don't know fully if I know the answer to your question, but first of all, I encourage you to get in touch with, I have a really good old friend who in the fall just started teaching at UC Santa Cruz. Her name's Meechin Cha. I'm not sure which department she's in, but she comes from the EJ movement. She's awesome, and she could be really helpful to you. But I would say that when you do have a religious institution like that, it might be helpful to talk to other religious institutions that are working in the EJ area, and they could be helpful in getting the message across to the religious institution that owns the property. But in addition to that, I also want to encourage you to talk to California Rural Legal Assistance, who work on a lot of, more rural and agricultural issues. And also there is an organization called Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. Are you? Awesome. Awesome. And so I was going to suggest talking to them because I think they could be also very helpful. So I wish you really good luck with that.
Unfortunately, we don't have any more time, but thank you
Sorry.
so much, Veronica, and please, welcome. Thank you again.
Thank you.